Chapter 6. Their Plan Unfolds. Elise sat quietly beside Jonathan as the final moments of the meeting unfolded on the large screen before them. Alpha James sat beside Luna Alicia while Lander and Reina appeared from their yacht in the Mediterranean. For several seconds after Jonathan finished outlining the proposed structure for the foundation, no one spoke. Then Alpha James leaned back thoughtfully in his chair. "The two of you have already begun thinking beyond yourselves," he said quietly. "Beyond titles, beyond status, beyond your own comfort." Elise exchanged a brief glance with Jonathan, uncertain where the conversation was leading. James continued calmly, "You're thinking about the future of the realm." The room grew noticeably quieter. Jonathan straightened slightly beside her. "Alpha?" Elise asked carefully. Alpha James was silent for another moment before finally speaking the words neither of them had expected to hear aloud. "Your mother and I have been discussing our eventual retirement plans." What had begun as a discussion about the medical foundation had gradually evolved into something far more serious. Elise froze. Beside her, Jonathan became very still. "We do not intend to step down immediately," James continued. "Snowy Mountain remains stable, and there is still much we intend to accomplish first. But dragons live long lives, and responsible rulers prepare the next generation long before transition becomes necessary." Elise's heart began pounding harder. "You're talking about succession," Jonathan said carefully. James nodded once. "We are." Silence filled the room. Strangely, Elise realized she wasn't entirely shocked. Not truly. Some part of her had sensed this possibility growing ever since accepting Jonathan as her mate. Lander's expression softened slightly from the screen. "You wouldn't be expected to take on the role immediately," he said calmly. "There would be time." 25 years at minimum, Luna Alicia added gently. "Likely longer." That finally allowed Elise to breathe again. "You would train," James said. "Learn governance directly, build relationships with leadership throughout the realm, prepare gradually instead of being thrown into responsibility unready." Jonathan frowned thoughtfully. "And during that time?" "You continue building your lives," James answered simply. Alicia smiled softly at Elise. "The foundation could still move forward," she said. "In fact, I believe it should." Reina nodded immediately. "A healthcare network connecting underserved human communities would strengthen relationships between dragons and humans throughout the realm. And it would give both of you experience building large-scale infrastructure and leadership systems," Lander added. Jonathan leaned back slightly, clearly already processing logistics. "I would likely need to delegate more responsibilities within the financial firm," he admitted slowly. James nodded. "Eventually, yes." The Alpha King spoke then. "I agree, and we have some very capable executives you should be able to delegate to and eventually promote if they proved themselves." Queen Helena added, "I like the idea of seeing both my boys in leadership roles." Neither Lander nor Jonathan responded to their mother calling them boys. Elise barely heard the rest of the conversation for several moments. Ruling Snowy Mountain. The words felt impossibly large. And yet, not impossible. Not beside Jonathan. Not with time. Eventually the meeting concluded, leaving Jonathan and Elise alone in the quiet sitting room of their suite. For several long moments neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy now, not uncomfortable, simply full. Jonathan finally exhaled slowly and loosened the collar of his shirt before leaning back against the sofa. "Well," he murmured, "that was unexpected." Elise let out a soft, nervous laugh. "Was it?" That earned a glance from him. She looked down briefly at her hands. I think part of me knew this conversation was coming eventually, she admitted quietly. I just didn't think it would happen this soon. Jonathan was silent for a moment. Then he reached over and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed slowly across her knuckles, grounding both of them. "Do you want it?" he asked softly. The question settled deeply between them. Not, "Do you think we should?" Not, "Would we be good at it?" But, "Do you want it?" Elise stared at their joined hands for several seconds before answering honestly. "I don't know," she whispered. Jonathan nodded slightly, as if he understood completely. "I don't know either." She looked up at him then, relieved to hear the same uncertainty reflected in his voice. For all his confidence and calm leadership, he was just as overwhelmed as she was. "Do you think we could do it?" she asked quietly. Jonathan was silent for a long moment before answering. "Not right now," he admitted honestly. That answer should have frightened her. Instead, it oddly reassured her, because he wasn't pretending, wasn't claiming certainty he didn't feel. "But 25 years," he continued thoughtfully before giving a quiet shake of his head. "For dragons, that's barely any time at all." Elise smiled faintly at the truth of it. A human lifetime could pass in what many dragons considered only a single stage of adulthood. "But it's enough time to learn," Jonathan added quietly. His gaze drifted thoughtfully toward the darkened windows of the suite. As second-borns, we were raised understanding the etiquette of the realm, diplomacy, formality, clan relationships. A faint smile touched his lips. How to survive endless political dinners. That earned a soft laugh from Elise. "But leadership," he continued more seriously, "actually ruling a territory, managing the long-term stability of an entire clan, that's different." Elise nodded slowly. "But you already have leadership experience from running your clan's finance organization." He smiled at her reassurance. "And you have the skills and knowledge of a doctor, and that includes being able to make decisions under pressure when lives are at stake." Elise blushed at his compliment. Jonathan had spent most of his life immersed in finance, corporate strategy, and economic systems, while she herself had devoted nearly all her years to medicine, healing, and helping others. Neither of them had truly prepared to rule a dragon clan, not directly. "We would have time to learn the finer parts of leadership," Elise said quietly, without being thrown into it immediately. Jonathan looked back toward her, his expression calmer now. "Time to make mistakes while your parents were still there to guide us," Jonathan admitted. "Time to grow into the responsibility instead of pretending we're already prepared for it," Elise added. Perhaps that was the true gift of a dragon's long life, not simply longevity, but time. Time to become the shifter leaders their future responsibilities would require them to be. Jonathan lifted her hand gently to his lips. "We don't need to decide tonight," he said softly. "No," she agreed quietly. But as she looked at the male beside her, steady, intelligent, compassionate, and endlessly calming, Elise realized something important. The idea of ruling Snowy Mountain no longer felt terrifying. It simply felt possible. Chapter 7. Tanned and Relaxed. The atmosphere inside the main receiving hall shifted the moment Reina and Lander entered. Several conversations stopped entirely, not out of formality, out of surprise. Sun-tanned, smiling, and more relaxed than anyone in either clan had ever seen them, the future king and queen of the realm looked nothing like the overworked leaders who had left several weeks earlier. Reina's red hair was streaked with highlights from her days in the sun, and the soft, golden tint of sun-kissed skin warmed her normally pale complexion. Beside her, Lander looked equally changed. The constant tension that had quietly lived in his posture for years had eased noticeably, making him appear younger somehow despite the unmistakable authority still surrounding him. Even their dragons felt calmer, content, satisfied. Patricia blinked as the pair approached. "I don't think I've ever seen either of you look this rested before." David snorted softly. "I was just thinking the same thing." Lander smirked without even pretending innocence. Mediterranean air. "And forcing him to stop working every 5 minutes, Reina added dryly. "That only happened the first week," Lander argued. Jonathan immediately frowned. "First week?" Elise laughed quietly beside him while Reina's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Don't ask," she warned. The room filled briefly with warm laughter before Alpha James finally stepped forward, his expression softening slightly as he looked at his daughter. "It's good to have you both home." The sincerity in his voice quieted the room for a moment. Reina smiled warmly. "It's good to be home." Unfortunately, reality returned quickly. Within the hour, the group had gathered in one of the private conference rooms overlooking the mountains, while Jonathan began the update on the status of the investigation. The relaxed happiness faded gradually as reports and files appeared across the digital screens. The forensic accountant has confirmed multiple financial inconsistencies tied to shell corporations connected to Aegis Core, Jonathan explained. Nothing direct enough yet for formal accusations, but enough to confirm someone deliberately concealed operational funding. Lander's expression hardened immediately. "And Lucas Varek?" Jonathan switched to another screen displaying the limited information they had gathered. "Still almost invisible publicly," he answered. "No meaningful online presence after becoming CEO, minimal interviews, carefully controlled appearances only." Reina frowned slightly. "Someone that careful doesn't make mistakes often." "No," Jonathan agreed quietly, "which means if we find one, we need to pay attention." The conversation continued for nearly another hour as they reviewed security upgrades, operational changes, and ongoing financial tracing efforts. Only once the formal briefing ended did the atmosphere lighten again. "There is one additional matter," Alpha James said calmly. Lander glanced toward him curiously. James exchanged a brief look with Alicia before continuing. "Jonathan and Elise have accepted our proposal to begin preparing as future Alpha and Luna of Snowy Mountain." Silence filled the room. Then Reina's eyes widened in genuine surprise before immediate happiness followed. "Elise?" Her sister laughed softly just before Reina crossed the room and hugged her tightly. "You accepted?" Elise nodded, still looking slightly overwhelmed by the reality of it herself. "Eventually, not immediately." "There will be a transition period," James explained. "Plenty of time for training and preparation." Lander stepped toward Jonathan and clasped his forearm firmly. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. Jonathan gave a small exhale that sounded suspiciously like relief. Lander smirked. "You're smiling now. Talk to me after your first council crisis." That earned several quiet laughs around the room. But beneath the humor was genuine approval. Not simply because Jonathan and Elise were capable, but because everyone present understood how naturally balanced they were together. Compassion and logic, healing and structure, strength without arrogance. Reina stepped back slightly and smiled at her sister. "You're going to be incredible." Emotion flickered briefly through Elise's eyes before she shook her head softly. "I'm hoping 25 years is enough time to figure that out." "It will be," Alicia said gently. The conversation eventually shifted once more, this time towards something far less political, the charity gala. Reina immediately leaned forward with renewed interest as plans and proposals appeared across the conference table. "The foundation announcement needs to feel hopeful," she said thoughtfully, "especially after everything that's happened recently." Jonathan nodded. "Agreed. This can't feel like a political maneuver." "It needs to feel personal," Elise added quietly. "Because it is." Lander leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "Security will need to remain tight regardless, especially now." David immediately nodded. "Patricia and I will coordinate the protection teams." Reina smiled faintly as she looked around the room. For the first time since the avalanche attack, the future no longer felt dominated entirely by danger and uncertainty. There were still threats waiting in the shadows, still enemies watching carefully. But now there was something else growing alongside the tension: new leadership, new purpose, and the beginning of something capable of changing far more than just their own clans. Chapter 8. The Enemy Revealed. The charity gala was everything Elise had hoped for. Elegant without being excessive, warm instead of political. The grand ballroom overlooking the mountain lake glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, while music drifted softly through the room. Human donors, medical leaders, business executives, and dragon representatives mingled together beneath banners displaying the logo and mission statement of the newly established medical foundation. For the first hour, everything felt normal, hopeful, festive. Elise stood near Jonathan, greeting several physicians interested in partnering with the foundation. Reina and Lander moved naturally through the ballroom, greeting guests beside Alpha James and Luna Alicia. Across the room, Patricia and David maintained a careful but unobtrusive security presence, while still attempting to appear like honored guests instead of protective predators. Which, Patricia reflected dryly, was becoming increasingly difficult around dragon royalty. Reina smiled politely at one of the human donors, speaking with her, while absently lifting her champagne glass. Then froze. Her dragon surged upward instantly. Wrong. The sensation hit so suddenly that her smile almost faltered. Not danger exactly. Something worse. Familiar. Her heightened instincts as future queen sharpened immediately, sifting through the crowded ballroom beneath layers of perfume, wine, polished wood, flowers, expensive fabrics, and dragon scent. Then she found it again. Faint, carefully hidden. Her pulse jumped. Masking herbs. The exact same herbal blend Elise had created for her before the mating ball. Shock flashed through her. No ordinary human would recognize the scent. Most dragons wouldn't either. But Reina knew it intimately because she had worn it herself. Her gaze shifted slowly across the ballroom without changing expression. Lander immediately noticed the subtle tension entering her posture. "What is it?" he murmured softly, without moving his smile. Reina kept her expression perfectly composed. She answered him through their mate bond. "Someone is masking their scent." Lander went utterly still beside her. At the opposite side of the ballroom, Elise suddenly stiffened as well. Jonathan noticed instantly. Her dragon was reacting. Not fear, alarm. Elise's gaze slowly lifted across the room until it collided directly with Reina's. Understanding passed instantly between the sisters. They both knew that scent. Jonathan's expression sharpened immediately as he moved slightly closer to Elise. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. Elise kept her smile perfectly calm for the nearby guests, not wanting to be overheard. She used their link. "The herbs. Someone here is using them." Jonathan's entire body went still. Across the ballroom, Patricia reacted before anyone explained anything to her. Her dragon surged aggressively beneath her skin, instincts roaring to the surface, hard enough to nearly trigger a defensive shift. Threat. Close. Hidden. David immediately caught her wrist beneath the table near the wall. Patricia. Her eyes flashed dangerously toward the crowded ballroom. "I smell it," she growled softly. Nearby humans continued laughing, completely unaware. Dancers rotated gracefully across the floor. But beneath the elegant surface of the gala, every dragon in the royal circle was suddenly hunting. Reina carefully reached outward with her calming aura, her dragon instinctively responding to Patricia's rising aggression. Warmth brushed against Patricia's dragon. Steady, safe. Not prey, not an attack. Reina's dragon communicated softly to Patricia's. Patricia exhaled slowly as the violent instinct eased enough for rational thought to return. Only then did she realize the scent itself wasn't what triggered her dragon. It was what the masking implied. Someone was hiding what they truly were. And every dragon instinct she possessed hated it. Reina and Elise subtly began moving independently through the ballroom. Not together. Too obvious. Their movements appeared natural to the human guests. A greeting here, a conversation there, a slow rotation through donors and executives. But both women were tracking the scent beneath the music and perfume, until finally Reina's gaze settled briefly on a dark-haired, slim-built man standing near one of the large ballroom windows, speaking with several investors. Lucas Varick. The old photograph Jonathan had uncovered hadn't fully captured him. In person, he was smoother somehow, controlled. Sharp eyes hidden behind effortless charm. And the moment Reina's gaze met his, he knew. Not suspicion, not uncertainty. Recognition. Reina saw it in the microscopic tightening around his eyes before his expression smoothed once more into polished social calm. Beside her, Lander's dragon rose violently. "Fox," he heard his dragon declare. Not physically threatening, not dominant, but dangerous in an entirely different way. A manipulator, a hidden predator moving quietly through dragon territory. Lucas lifted his wineglass slightly toward Reina in a gesture so polite most humans would interpret it as simple acknowledgement. But beneath it sat a message. I know you know. Reina returned the same perfectly elegant smile and understood immediately that he could not leave now. Not quickly. Not after being noticed by the future queen herself. Doing so would draw attention, create suspicion, confirm guilt. Social rules had trapped him almost as effectively as physical guards, and Lucas Varick understood it. The ballroom transformed instantly after that. Not visibly. The dance floor was full. Music continued playing. Champagne still flowed freely while donors discussed charitable outreach and medical partnerships. But beneath the polished surface, an entirely different game had begun. A chess match between predators. Lander casually repositioned himself closer to Reina. Patricia slowly adjusted security placement throughout the ballroom. David gave instructions to capture pictures of Varick through the security cameras. Jonathan quietly moved nearer to Elise without interrupting her conversation with several potential investors. No one confronted Lucas directly. That would create panic, questions, exposure. Instead, the dragons circled. Polite smiles, carefully measured words, hidden tension beneath practiced elegance, and through it all, Lucas Varick remained outwardly calm. But Reina noticed one thing very clearly. For the first time all evening, the fox was no longer comfortable. Because he had entered a room believing himself hidden, only to discover the dragons could smell him. The gala finally ended nearly 2 hours later. Lucas Varick was among the last major guests to leave. Reina watched from the upper balcony beside Lander as the black luxury vehicle disappeared down the mountain road beneath the cover of night. He knows we're watching him now, she said quietly. Yes. And we still can't prove enough. Lander's jaw tightened. Not enough for humans. Not enough for arrests. Not enough for public accusations. Everything Lucas had built was layered behind corporations, legal protections, and carefully controlled distance. A ghost hidden inside legitimate business structures. Below them, the ballroom staff continued cleaning, as if the evening had been nothing more than another successful event. Only the dragons understood the truth. Tonight had not been a gala. It had been a warning. And somewhere out in the darkness beyond Snowy Mountain, a fox shifter now knew the dragons had finally caught his scent. Chapter 9. Their Commitment. Twilight settled softly across the valley below Snowy Mountain, painting the sky in deep shades of violet, gold, and fading blue. At the base of the mountain, the summer air remained cool and crisp, carrying the clean scent of pine, stone, and the countless wildflowers naturally blooming throughout the valley floor. It was beautiful without trying to be, which was exactly why Patricia had chosen it. The only decoration she had allowed was the arch standing near the center of the clearing, woven entirely from local wildflowers gathered throughout the mountain territory earlier that morning. No elaborate crystal displays, no towering floral arrangements, just nature, just family, just them. As the guests gathered quietly beneath the fading evening sky, Reina smiled softly beside Lander. "This is completely Patricia," she murmured. Lander nodded in agreement. Simple, strong, no unnecessary nonsense. David might disagree with the no-nonsense part. Jonathan muttered nearby as David adjusted his formal jacket for perhaps the 10th time. "I heard that," David informed him. "You were supposed to." Despite the teasing, happiness radiated visibly from him tonight. Not the overwhelming intensity that had surrounded royal ceremonies, something steadier, deeper, certain. Patricia emerged several moments later beside Elise and Alicia, and the quiet conversations throughout the valley immediately softened. She looked stunning. Not because of jewels or elaborate styling, because she looked entirely like herself. Her pale blue gown flowed softly around her tall frame without excessive ornamentation, while her silver blonde hair fell loose in soft waves touched by tiny woven flowers. A warrior, a beta, a dragon female utterly comfortable in her own skin. And David looked absolutely destroyed by the sight of her. Lander smirked beside him. "You're staring." "I cannot help myself," Jonathan snorted softly. "I would be concerned if he was not staring." Patricia's expression softened the moment she reached David beneath the flower-covered arch. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other while the valley breeze moved gently through the surrounding wildflowers. Then David reached for her hands, and the world seemed to settle quietly into place around them. The ceremony itself remained deeply traditional. No lengthy speeches, no elaborate performances. Only ancient dragon vows spoken beneath the open sky before family, rulers, and the mountains that had shaped them both. As David and Patricia completed the final bond markings and their dragons settled fully together, a low rumble of approval echoed faintly from the surrounding cliffs as nearby dragons responded instinctively to the completed mating. Patricia laughed softly through sudden tears. David immediately kissed her before she could pretend she wasn't emotional. Several people laughed while Patricia glared at him half-heartedly. "You planned that." "Absolutely." The celebration afterward moved into the main dining hall of Snowy Mountain Fortress, where the atmosphere transformed almost immediately from emotional ceremony into loud celebration. Exactly as David and Patricia wanted. The scent of barbecue filled the massive hall, while long tables overflowed with smoked meats, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, potatoes, grilled corn, and every side dish and dessert imaginable. No formal plated courses, just good food, strong drinks, laughter, and family. Music echoed through the hall, while dragons relaxed and celebrated the mating of fated mates. Even the king and queen seemed noticeably more at ease. "This," David announced proudly, while carrying an enormous plate of food back toward Patricia, "is a proper reception." Patricia shook her head fondly. "You're impossible. And yet you mated with me anyway." Across the hall, Reina leaned comfortably against Lander, while watching Patricia threaten David with a fork after he stole food from her plate. "They really are perfect for each other," Reina said softly. Lander smiled faintly. Terrifying thought. Near the center table, Alicia and Queen Helena sat together discussing the ceremony, while Elise and Jonathan unknowingly walked directly into danger. "It really was lovely," Helena said warmly. Alicia nodded immediately. "Beautiful, intimate, very them." Elise smiled, entirely unaware of where the conversation was heading. Then Helena's expression shifted thoughtfully. "Of course," she said casually, "Jonathan and Elise's wedding will need to be significantly larger." Elise froze mid-sip. Beside her, Jonathan nearly choked on his drink. Reina immediately looked down into her wine glass to hide her growing smile. Lander outright abandoned them to their fate. "A mating ceremony would be enough for us," Jonathan attempted carefully. Both mothers looked at him the same way one might look at a child trying to eat with his hands. "No," Alicia said immediately. "Absolutely not," Helena agreed. Elise blinked. "But you are a prince and princess of the realm," Helena interrupted gently but firmly. "The future Alpha and Luna of Snowy Mountain." "And after Lander and Reina's royal wedding," Alicia added, "if we allow the two of you to quietly disappear for a small mating ceremony, the entire realm would accuse us of favouring our eldest children." Jonathan looked personally betrayed. Elise stared at her mother in horror. Reina could no longer hold back her laughter. "Oh no," she said between amused breaths. "Now you understand." Elise narrowed her eyes instantly. "This is your fault somehow." "I warned you," Reina informed her smugly. "Repeatedly." Lander finally returned, looking entirely too entertained by the situation. Jonathan looked toward him desperately. "You survived this. Help me." Lander placed a sympathetic hand on his shoulder. "You won't win." "That is not helpful. It's truthful." Around them, the mothers had already fully transitioned into planning mode. Guest lists, ceremony locations, the pavilion, of course, political invitations, seasonal timing. Elise slowly lowered her head into her hands. Jonathan stared into the distance like a man realizing his peaceful future had just died. And suddenly, both of them understood with painful clarity exactly how Lander and Reina had felt during every overwhelming moment of royal wedding planning. Reina lifted her wineglass toward her sister with entirely too much satisfaction. Elise glared at her from across the table. "You are enjoying this far too much." Reina smiled sweetly. "Absolutely."
Lander clapped his brother firmly on the back as Jonathan continued staring at the increasingly enthusiastic discussion between their mothers, with the expression of a man watching his freedom slowly disappear. "Cheer up, brother," Lander said solemnly. "At least they'll allow you to plan your own honeymoon." Jonathan looked at him suspiciously. "That sounds like there's a catch." "There's always a catch," David offered helpfully from nearby. Patricia elbowed him immediately, but Elise noticed her hiding a laugh. Lander's expression remained perfectly serious. "I'm simply choosing to focus on the positive." Reina nearly choked on her wine, trying not to laugh because she knew very well what Lander was intentionally leaving out. The security arrangements, the tracking protocols, the royal protection teams discreetly following at varying distances, the endless negotiations required before they had finally been allowed even a small amount of privacy during their own honeymoon. Jonathan narrowed his eyes further. "Lander? What are you not telling me?" Lander smiled slowly. "Nothing important." Across the table, Reina suddenly became very interested in her dessert, while David outright laughed. Elise immediately noticed all of it. "Oh no," she muttered softly. "There's definitely something." Lander merely lifted his drink calmly. He would let Jonathan discover that particular nightmare on his own.
Epilogue. The future looks brighter. The atmosphere inside Alpha James's private strategy room remained calmer than it had been during the weeks immediately following the avalanche attack. Not relaxed, never fully relaxed anymore, but steadier. Outside the fortress windows, early morning sunlight reflected across the mountain peaks, while the valley below still carried traces of the previous evening's celebration for David and Patricia's mating ceremony. Inside the room, attention had shifted back toward the final unresolved threat lingering over all of them: Lucas Varek. Jonathan stood near the large digital display reviewing the latest reports from the forensic accountant, while Lander leaned against the windows beside Reina. Elise sat quietly near Alicia, while David and Patricia occupied their usual positions near the far side of the room. For several moments, only the sound of turning pages and quiet typing filled the silence. Then Jonathan suddenly stopped moving. His expression sharpened. Reina noticed immediately. "What is it?" Jonathan slowly looked up from the reports in front of him. "I think we've been approaching this the wrong way." That immediately gained everyone's attention. Lander straightened slightly. "Explain." Jonathan turned the screen toward them, displaying the now familiar network of shell corporations, hidden investments, redirected funding, and manipulated financial pathways connected to Aegis Core. "For weeks, we've been trying to determine whether we had enough evidence for a human criminal investigation," he said slowly. "Enough for arrests, prosecutions, subpoenas, corporate seizure." Patricia frowned. "We don't. Not by human standards," Jonathan said quietly, "because human courts demanded direct evidence clean enough to survive teams of attorneys, procedural challenges, corporate protections, and endless claims of plausible deniability. And Lucas Varek had built Aegis Core specifically to survive exactly that kind of scrutiny. He built in layer after layer of separation, distance between himself and every illegal action, subordinates positioned like pawns to take the blame, shielding Varek from accountability. Jonathan's expression hardened. "And honestly," he said quietly, "if Lucas Varek were only human, he might have succeeded." The room fell silent. because everyone present knew how often powerful humans escaped consequences using money, lawyers, and carefully constructed deniability. But Jonathan changed the screen again. Lucas Varek's image from the charity gala appeared on the screen. The problem for him, Jonathan continued, is that he isn't human. A ripple of understanding rolled through the room. The moment we identified him as a fox shifter, this stopped being only a human legal matter. Alicia slowly leaned back in her chair. The High Council. Jonathan nodded once. Alpha James smiled as he added, unlike human governments, the High Council understood exactly what supernatural power made possible. Humans might accept that a CEO had no knowledge of hidden operations buried beneath layers of subordinates. The Council would not. Because shifters possess heightened abilities tied to their animal forms, advantages humans simply do not have, which meant the burden of responsibility changed. He can't hide behind plausible deniability the same way a human executive could, Jonathan explained. The Council will view the concealment itself as evidence of intent. Elisa's expression darkened slightly. The masking herbs. Jonathan nodded immediately. He wasn't hiding from humans at that gala. Humans would never have noticed him. His voice grew colder. He was hiding from dragons. Reina remembered the exact moment the fox realized she recognized the scent. The calm calculation in his eyes, the instant understanding that the game had changed. Patricia crossed her arms tightly. And the Council will see that as premeditated deception inside another clan's territory. Yes. Jonathan moved through the remaining evidence. The sabotage, the mole within Snowy Mountain, the hidden funding structures, the scent concealment, the deliberate manipulation of human systems while secretly operating as a supernatural actor against another territory. And the High Council also understands the delicate balance required for shifters operating within the human world. Silence settled heavily across the room. No major shifter territory will trust Aegis Core after this. The implications hit immediately. Aegis existed because powerful people trusted it with sensitive systems, financial infrastructure, and private information. Trust was its foundation, and among shifters, rumors of distrustful behavior spread quickly, especially when the High Council became involved. He may avoid human prison, Jonathan admitted calmly, but his influence inside the cybersecurity world is finished. Alpha James described the process. Once we assemble the evidence, photographs, and witness statements, I will prepare a formal complaint for the High Council. Their response will take months, but eventually we should begin seeing the results. A strange quiet settled over the room after that. Not triumph, not celebration, something steadier, final. Because for the first time since the avalanche attack, they could finally see the end of it. Lucas Varek had built his empire believing human systems would always protect him, believing enough money, enough lawyers, enough layers of corporate separation could shield him from consequences forever. And perhaps they could have, if he had only been human. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that dragons understood predators who hunted from the shadows, and now the supernatural world knew exactly what he was. For the first time in months, Reina felt her dragon fully relax beside Lander's. Not because all danger had vanished, but because the threat hunting them no longer controlled the board. The fox had finally been dragged into the light, and the board no longer belonged to him. Thank you so much for listening to The Reckoning here on Enchanted Realms Audiobooks. I truly appreciate you spending time in the Dragon Realm with Reina, Lander, Jonathan, Elise, David, Patricia, and the clans of Snowy Mountain and Pinnacle. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future audiobooks, shorts, and new adventures from the realm. And if you would like to continue exploring the world of dragons, fated mates, royal intrigue, and supernatural destiny, be sure to check out the other books and stories available here on the channel. More journeys through the dragon realm are still waiting ahead. Until next time, thank you for listening, and may destiny guide your path.